welcome back to the Ocean Currents podcast. I have my one of my co-podcasters, Miles, here, virtually connected, and we're connecting directly with Mr. Eric Helling, who's a Fisker Ocean owner, and we want to learn more about his background and, sort of figure out what makes our members tick in the Fisker Owners Association. Welcome, Miles. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you for having me.
Great to be here. One of the things that we like to do as part of this series is to get to know some of the members of the community. We've had people from as far away as Iraq join the show. Eric, I think you could start us off by just telling us a little bit about what part of the country you're in, and specifically what it was that made you want to get a Fisker Ocean.
So the first half's really easy. I'm about little over half an hour north of Augusta, Georgia. I'm kind of on the edge of the rural bubble of Augusta. So I live pretty much everything north of me there's not much there. We actually run out of cell service not too far north of me, which does factor into things like having, web-enabled cars. And I live kind of in the boondocks. I mean, I can hear coyotes and, people are hunting and stuff like that. And I don't see ever a Fisker where I live. How did I get into Fisker? Was that the second half of this?
Yeah, so exactly.
It isn't obviously peer pressure from people you live near.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely an outlier. So I was aware of Fisker. I like to work on cars and I am comfortable with EVs. And I saw the fire sale for 38.5 or whatever the cars were going for almost exactly 2 years ago. And due to my prior experience just tinkering on cars, and I've done a ton of racing and I can get into that later, but I decided why not take on a car that's probably an orphan car. I could see the writing on the wall. I think everybody did at the time of the fire sale, but I thought it would be kind of a cool car to have. And I knew I was probably taking a chance and hopefully everybody went into this eyes open. And, the FOA has definitely made this a ton better. And I'm very, very grateful to everybody from FOA. But I told my wife, hey, isn't this a great car for you? And so it was sort of a project for me too. This is primarily her daily driver. I'm actually not the person who mostly drives it. I'm just the support person. But I thought it would be kind of a fun other car to have. And so we took the plunge, and then, immediately I, checked up on FOA. This was before there was paid membership, but I forget exactly when I started getting on discourse and stuff, but that was probably in June or July of 2 years ago. So, right after I bought the car, before FOA was having paid membership. And I just took notes on everything, mental notes and so far so good. I've had a few little hiccups here and there, and we can talk about that if you want.
Well, no, I think the shocking revelation right at the start of the show is that it's not your daily driver; it's your wife's car. So yeah. That's a bit of an interesting tale. What is your daily driver then?
So I have a Tesla Model S Plaid.
Okay.
And that's my daily driver. So.
Interesting. Okay, but you provide all the tech support for the wife's Fisker Ocean.
Yeah.
I love that.
So I recently had ORS come by for ADAS 3.1, and Miles, I know you know this, but and we can talk about that too if you want. But other than that, 100% of all the work done on my vehicle has been done by me, and I've dug into it pretty hard, honestly. I was kind of worried about what would I do if I didn't have, some sort of support nearby. And, people in Atlanta on a good day is 2.5 hours from me. Okay. So if I ever had anything go wrong with the vehicle, it'd be like flatbedding it, hours and hours and hours to somewhere. And so I knew that going into it. And
it sounds like technology and detail course through your veins.
Yeah.
So where does that come from?
I am a former Army plastic surgeon, ex-special ops. And I've gone through medical school and I've gone through specialty training and then fellowship training. And, I've written papers, I've written a textbook chapter. I actually teach courses. What I'm known for is ballistic facial reconstruction. I travel other places and teach courses on how to take care of people who got shot in the face and stuff.
Wow.
I've done multiple combat tours. That's what all this nonsense back here is. But, I've seen a lot of really bad things, and, I have to dig into like the technical aspects of like how to fix these things and come up with like, systems for how, what's the algorithm for fixing someone. And some of this stuff is kind of new and I don't come up with all the answers, but, we collaborate, or at least when I was in the Army, I've been out 8 years now, not quite 8 years, but I did 32 years of active duty, by the way. But
thank you for your service.
No, it's my pleasure. Believe me, I stayed past retirement, so it wasn't like somebody was like twisting my arm. I mean, it's.
Can I just jump in for one quick second though? You're talking about something that's actually, if you think about it, like reconstructing someone's face from war sounds like a really, really emotional and challenging thing to do. I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of energy that you put in over the years in rebuilding people's lives and thinking about how to do that the best way possible. I mean, there's a lot there. So it seems like a really charged and challenging line of work to be in from the very beginning, right?
So you probably overestimate like what I do. I think most people do. And like, I'm not saying what I do isn't like technically difficult, and it is. And you have to figure out best practices and like what's going to work in this situation. And sometimes you don't even know, like sometimes you just have to kind of make it up like you do with a Fisker, and you got to like, no, I'm completely serious. This is sort of like me. So my job is a lot of tinkering. My real job, like, I have a hole in somebody's face and I got to, figure out like what the best plan is to reconstruct it. And there's various tools that you can use, to plan surgery up front if you have time to plan. I mean, if it's like an emergency, obviously you just do damage control surgery, but usually you can catch your breath and, look at a CAT scan and measure some things and, figure out what things will work. And there's a variety of reconstructive choices, which, I don't want to turn this into a medical discussion, but it's surprisingly similar to like complex problem solving for the Fisker. I think a lot of like good problem solver people that, are technically good with their hands, which is, a common trait in people that are like mechanics and stuff like that. I think we share a lot of the same skill sets, and, hopefully we make informed choices for the people we work on, the patients, and hopefully we make good choices with, whatever we're doing on various vehicles or something like that. But
when we reached out to you, Eric, you responded with something that really caught my attention though. And you said that, from all of your experience in the military and after seeing so much, suffering and people who've died from war, that you decided that, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, but you said that the impact on you was that you noticed a lot of these wars were coming directly from oil, and you therefore became more interested in the EV space.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So, I've had a few friends die, and so I'm ex-special ops too. I was a basically flight surgeon, dive medical officer in the Ranger Regiment. And when I first started out, I worked as like an apprentice physician with someone named Brian Allgood. Eventually I did go to the Ranger Regiment myself. Brian got killed in 2008, maybe 2009. He got shot down in Iraq. There's a hospital at one of the bigger bases in Korea. It's called the Brian Allgood Community Hospital. It's named after him now. I was a medical officer for the unit that went to Somalia, the Black Hawk Down movie. I was not in the firefight. I had a number of people that have been killed in combat, and I've had a number of brushes with mostly Al Qaeda, but like terrorist bombings. So I was in Germany as a head and neck surgeon. I started doing specialty medicine after the Ranger Regiment, and I went and trained as a head and neck surgeon at Walter Reed, and then I subsequently did plastic surgery. But my first assignment out of Walter Reed was I went to Landstuhl, which is the base in Germany. And right after I got there, we had the embassy bombings. I don't know if you remember the Tanzania, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, Nairobi, Kenya embassy bombings. So that was from Al Qaeda. The Khobar Tower bombings were just before that. But anyways, I started having brushes with Al Qaeda. And then not long after that, I was involved in taking care of all the wounded from the USS Cowl bombing. And, I started wondering about these groups, these terrorist groups, because, I was seeing the baggage that came out of our encounters, and obviously I was, a provider trying to fix these people, but I was kind of curious about, how does this stuff occur, and there's a variety of reasons why terrorism happens. And I don't want to go off on a giant tangent about that, but I do want to talk about how it's funded. And I went to Afghanistan. I did 2 tours of Afghanistan. And on my first tour, this was in 2011, I did 211 surgeries. So I was really busy. Like I was overwhelmed with casualties. Like there was several times that I operated for 48 hours straight. And then, we'd have a break in the wounded and, I'd drink a bunch of Gatorade and sleep. And then we'd start over again. I had one stretch, it went 72 hours, but anyways, I'm telling literal war stories. So I'll quit with that. But I did a lot of surgery and I saw a lot of people get killed, and I'd had multiple friends killed at this point. And I was really kind of curious, like, where are these people? Like, how are they doing this to us? And so I snooped about it, and basically it kind of comes from 3 places. One is it comes from like things like drugs or commodities that they can, sell on a black market. And there's a fair amount of that comes out of Afghanistan. They sell poppy and turns into opium and then heroin. That's some of the money for the Taliban came from that. Some of it comes from common crime, like kidnapping and basically stealing things and stuff like that. But a big chunk of it comes from oil. And I realized towards the end of that tour, where I had just been overwhelmed with wounded, like, I was exhausted. I'd done so many surgeries. And I realized that, oh my God, all these people who are rolling coal and, saying drill baby drill are literally killing my friends, that's a little bit extreme the way I'm painting it. But I was like, oh my God, oil is a huge problem. And I sort of understood that before. And like, I am all about, I've had 3 Corvettes, 2 BMW M3s, a series of drag cars, I was all about laying rubber and all this other stuff. And I was just like, man, this is terrible, when it finally dawned on me that we were, causing, the funding of this. I'm not saying that like turning off all the funding is going to immediately stop it all, but, we were substantially enabling this. And I was like, oh my God. So I got done with my first tour in Afghanistan in 2011. And I said, man, that's it. And I had a ZR1 Corvette at this point. Okay. And I'm just like, man, I didn't sell my ZR1 immediately, but I went and I bought a Chevy Volt. And I did it as sort of a reactionary move. I was sort of like poo-pooing the whole Prius thing, what a bunch of, yogurt, eating granola, Birkenstock people, who drive these vehicles, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, but anyway, so I went and bought a Volt. And I got to tell you, it was a first generation Volt. And, I don't know if you've ever driven one of these, but it has like a touch screen that all the controls they're I forget what it's called, but you can just touch them and they enable it. And it was a little too sensitive. But other than that, it was a pretty good vehicle. And I could get, about 40 miles of range a day. And, I was working on base, which was about 20 miles away from me at Fort Gordon at the time. And I had a little game with myself. I would see if I could drive this thing, to work and back just on electrons. And, and I would go a long time without putting gas in. And then suddenly and I just had to plug it in on 110. And, everybody's like, what's wrong with the Colonel? Like, why is he driving this dope mobile? And, you know, so, I was an '06 at the time. But anyway, so I was like, yeah, this isn't bad. And, I plugged the thing on 110. I didn't get any special, install of a charger or anything. I just used the travel charger it came with. And, the first time I had to go like get gas in like 3 months, I'm like, who does this? Why am I waiting in line to get gas? So anyways, it's been all like smooth sailing since then. And I got a Model 3 performance, and I've done, some track time. I actually got a YouTube video of me probably setting a lap record for EVs at Carolina Motorsports Park, although there's no official EV lap time, so I'm not entirely sure. But man, the whining in the pits when you get beat by an EV is like epic.
Yeah.
It's really hilarious. And then I was like, man, I got to get a Plaid. So that's what I'm driving now. It was a little bit of a stretch, but yeah, that's fun. So that long story, but the short version is don't burn oil and you can have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah, I mean, we all have our reasons for going to an EV and specifically to a Fisker Ocean, but that's an incredible connection that you made in your personal life. It makes me wonder, Bill, what your reason for getting an EV was. Do you want to share that?
Sure. My wife and I decided we're going to try to tread lightly. We've always been, so we call ourselves like children of Depression era parents who kind of saved and scrimped on everything. Mm-hmm. And we just saw there from my field of home energy reduction and home energy conservation. So we built a net zero house that runs on solar, and the EV was sort of like the icing on the cake. We could use the solar panels to charge, and not so much as like a statement for anyone, but it's sort of because we could, we did, and we think it's the best way, and we'll never not have an EV.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, in my case, I mean, I don't work in, or have any connection really to military, Eric, but I did work for about 15 years of my career internationally. So my field was focused on kind of what happens a lot of times after conflicts, and I worked in the development space. So USAID, when it existed prior to being shut down last year, was one of the bigger clients that I worked with. And we would go to places like Afghanistan, but we were there specifically to film and produce content about what was happening in Afghanistan as a result of our involvement in those countries. So I saw a lot of places that had seen a lot of impact from war and a lot of struggle from war. So I definitely understand what you're talking about with the connection between, especially the oil industry and conflicts and suffering for human beings all around the world. And so, for me, it was just a question of, in my personal life, I would rather be a part of the EV movement. But even beyond that, I just saw it as the writing's on the wall. I mean, we're going to run out of fossil fuels very soon relative to the human experience on this planet. So it's better to be prepared for what's coming than to just be using something that will run out. And I think that's where, Bill, we also went solar at my house, and we decided to get, we actually have two EVs. So, I mean, it's for me, it's just more of a personal choice. But then also, as you both know, when you drive an EV, they're just more fun. I mean, the cars are just more fun. That's flat out the number one reason why I like them so much, is they're just a lot of fun.
I described it once as what I thought driving would be like when I was a little kid.
Yeah.
Is what I'm driving now.
You just push the pedal and go. So I think your personal experience and what brought you to having a Fisker, I think, is fascinating. I mean, I think there's definitely something about the mentality that you bring to things where it's very methodical, it's very planned. You research things and you dive into things really, really deeply, Eric. And I've noticed that with some of the videos that you do on waterproofing, for example. This has like been a big topic for you and figuring out how water moves about the ocean. And I'm expecting in your response that you're going to say all of this is due to the dedication you have for your wife's experience in the car. You want her to have the best possible Fisker Ocean out there. Isn't that right?
That is the appropriate answer. Some of it's because I'm just curious too. People started probably in September of the year I got it, or maybe August. Like I saw the first picture of like a corroded connector, and there was some chatter on discourse, and I was like, okay, what do we do about this? And, some people came up with various ideas like enclosures, which I personally don't think that's a good idea. I think it's expensive and clunky and stuff like that. But there were a variety of ideas thrown out, like, what can we do to fix this? And then I was like, well, why is there a problem in the first place? And I was like, well, we probably should waterproof this stuff, but like, is this, these connectors, like you are able to get water on these, sealed, seal pack connectors or whatever they're called. But, even on like ice cars, you're not supposed to bathe these things in water. And, I was kind of curious, like, what in the world's going on? Why is there so much water in the front of the car? And so I asked a bunch of people on discourse, like, people were offering solutions, but I was like, why is this happening in the first place? And people started writing about how, hey, I washed my car and I sprayed water on the windshield, and then I had all these like problems like 2 seconds later. I'm like, how in the world can that possibly happen? That makes no sense. I thought it was BS when I first heard it. And I asked some people, who are sort of notable in the community, and I'm not going to name anybody names, but I asked some questions like, can you stick a camera in there and figure out what's going on? And like, everybody just sort of like, I don't know. And I was like, okay, fine, I'll do it. And I did have an endoscope already. I use it for other stuff, for cars. Mm-hmm. But I was like, well, let's see if I can figure out what's going on. Like, why is there, is there water coming onto the front of the car? And I stuck a scope in one of the, just under the bumper. You can kind of just work it up in there without removing anything. And then I just shot water at my windshield, and lo and behold, there's this like waterfall on my scope. And I'm like, what is going on here? How can there be water in the front of the front bumper? And I started gradually, like, my first video is just awful. Like, I'm using my phone and I'm like videoing the video camera on the endoscope, and, and they're still awful. Like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I finally figured out that I had to take off the fender liner to figure out how this water was getting there, or at least some of it. And there's multiple places of entry, and I can describe those in a second if you want. But what I found in particular was there's this frame support rail that's right under the fender, and it goes all the way to the cowl. And I took the fender liner off, and I finally realized it. And I just kept over and over and over. I'd spray water on one part of the car, and I'd have an endoscope stuck up. I started with everything still assembled, and I put the endoscope under there, and I'd spray like, the windshield, this and that, and see what would make a lot of water land in the front bumper. And I was like, this is crazy. How is it coming from the windshield? And so I eventually took off the fender liner, and I eventually realized, by spraying water up at the top, it would run the way the frame support rail that's up there is made. It's probably for strength, but it's been creased. So it's got like a little V shape that runs the length of it, which is, pretty common for like strengthening like pieces of metal that are structural or whatever. But anyways, this V shape acts like a little aqueduct, and water literally, runs from the base of the windshield all the way, and it lands directly on the connectors. It's like hilarious. You couldn't engineer this any worse than it is. It's like, what? How is this even possible? And so then my first solution was to, like, I went through all these sort of nonsense ideas of like, creating some special barrier or diversion thing. And I tried a bunch of stuff, which of course I didn't put on a video, like I was trying to cut out pieces of plastic sheeting. And I finally got sick of it. And I took a pool noodle and I just wrapped it in like HVAC tape and I stuck it up in there. And I was like, wow, this works great. And then I can just tape it down and like make a little barrier up there. So that's where the whole pool noodle HVAC tape barrier for this frame support rail came from. And that worked pretty well. And then I was kind of like, why is this water flowing, from the base of the windshield? It's still sort of a weird design. And I kept tracing this back further and further with the scope. And eventually I did both sides too. But it turns out the ultimate flaw that, other than the frame support rail thing is a huge flaw. That's a major design flaw, because even if you had appropriate water management from the Cowl, which it looks like they, in my opinion, and I'm not an automotive engineer, but it looks like they did the generally appropriate planning for how the water exits. But if you overflow the Cowl, which could happen in like a drenching situation, it would still land on this support rail. So even if everything was engineered in the Cowl, like that rail is a huge problem. Like you still have to put a diverter on there. Even if you solve every single problem with the Cowl itself, like there's going to be overflow situations and like, car washes, or I wouldn't recommend running through a car wash, by the way. But anyways, I started running the scope up under the Cowl, and eventually I realized that there is a normal pathway that the water is supposed to exit from the undersurface of the Cowl. So there's two pretty large holes that if you take your fender liner off, it drains from these holes that are sort of inboard of the fender slightly on each side. It goes down, it exits on the back side of the front wheel well behind the fender liner, but it drains out the back of the fender liner effectively. And what had happened is the holes in the actual Cowl itself, the plastic Cowl, are slightly too far outboard, where when the water drips down and it should flow into these larger holes under the Cowl, it actually hits a little lip. So there's this big hole, and then there's a lip. It's a metal, it's sort of like a seam where the frame has been put together, the unibody, but the hole drips kind of directly on it. And there's a video that I took of this, and it's sort of this nonsense video. Like, why did this guy put this video up of like water dripping on this metal seam? What's that all about? But anyways, I confirmed that it lands on the seam. And then I realized you had to move those holes inboard on the Cowl. And I subsequently came up with a solution just to drill the holes further inboard on the Cowl. And then it turns out under the Cowl, there's also some gaps and some fasteners that the water can leak through. And I don't think they're a tremendous part of the problem, but I realized it's probably a good idea to seal those. So you can take, some foam tape and kind of plug these little holes. And there's a video on that, or silicone or something, and put it in the fasteners. And I've scoped this thing. Oh my God. Like I've probably spent 10 or 14 hours just scoping the car at this point. And, and I absolutely can hands down say the amount of water that goes in front of my car is like dramatically reduced. And so I got done with all that nonsense. And then there's someone, and I'm probably not going to say their name right, but I think his name in Discourse is ML Stefan, but he put some stuff on Discourse about water getting in and hitting the PTC heater on the right, the positive temperature coefficient heater on the right, which would be the passenger side for US. But anyways, there's a pretty big gap in the fender liner, and it stands to reason that just, spray of water as you're driving along in wet conditions probably goes in and hits that too. And so I started spraying in there, and I confirmed that, yes, that definitely happens. And I followed his lead, and he designed it's Kydex, but like thin moldable plastic. And I basically stole what he did, but I did something similar. But I think it's probably a good idea to put some barriers to further shrink down the inner fender liner opening right adjacent to the suspension. Like there's just too much of a space in there, I think. And you can see some early corrosion in a video I took of my car, which is definitely from that. And I've also confirmed that water does not flow to the PTC heater from the cowl. Like I've scoped it and looked at the engine bay area in there. Some does fall like from the central portion of the cowl. It does drip down those fasteners that I was talking about, but it's not a tremendous amount, but it's something. But the PTC heater in my car was starting to get like early corrosion, and it definitely is not coming from the cowl, even if you have a waterfall flowing over that frame rail. And so I haven't done it with the car driving. Like I could probably get a GoPro or something, put it in there, but it stands to reason that that hole in the fender liner is just too big, and you probably ought to shrink that thing down. And, then I've rescoped the car again, and, there's less and less water intrusion. And originally I was sort of like, I don't think the hood's a problem. And now I think it was also the guy who posts, his name is ML Stefan, but I think he was the one that also originally came up with the weather stripping around the car's hood. And I can absolutely confirm that does make a difference. And I also have sprayed water from the underneath of the car to kind of see where it comes up. And the vehicle sound for pedestrians box, there's this big grill on the passenger side under the bumper. And you definitely spray a lot of water up under there, and it'll land on your connectors. The VSP box is right in front of your connectors. And anyways, I think everybody should block that thing off. It's complete nonsense. I don't know why that thing is so wide open. Somebody posted a VSP box full of water. I forget who it was, but it's just a terrible design. Like I've had other cars that had obviously my Tesla, and I think even the Volt made sound, and they just don't have the water, or the speaker's not like exposed to the elements. I mean, it's like stupid. Like literally the speaker diaphragm, like the speaker portion, like you can see from the underside of the car. Like it doesn't have to be that exposed to the elements. And the thing's super loud anyways. And if you block it off with a VSP block off plate, like you can hear it anyways. I mean, it's still really, really loud.
Actually, Eric, I wanted to ask you real quick. So there's basically, I'm gonna hand it over to Bill in a second, but I just wanted your reaction to this. I think there's three kinds of people in this waterproofing world with the Fisker Ocean, right? The first type of person is like oblivious to it and just kind of hopes and has their fingers crossed that nothing's going to happen, and
that's not going to work.
drive their car along and just hope for sunny days, right?
Yep.
There's a second kind of person who's like, okay, this car is not a submarine. I'm going to do the basics. I'm going to wrap some of the wires, and I'm going to move on with my life. And the third kind of person I think is more like in your category, where it's like, okay, let's figure this out and let's get as much waterproofing done as possible to make sure that nothing really gets fried. So I'm not saying that I'm one of those three. I definitely am. But I'm going to say this. Is there concern enough from your end to say, like without any doubt whatsoever, that all of the methods that you've been uncovering are really critical for the survival of this car?
So, there's confirmation bias. The things that you do, you want to believe they have impact, and, it's the right thing to do, and blah, blah, blah. I can tell you without any question, the things that I've done for water mitigation do decrease the amount of water that ends up in the connectors or in the front compartment. Like that is true. Does it make a difference? Like, are you going to have a failure in the car if all you do is wrap your connectors and you don't go insane, like plugging every little thing? I can't tell you that with 100% certainty. But having said that, I think it's probably relatively easy to chase down some of these things like weather stripping for the hood. It's not so easy to make a fender liner custom, Kydex thing on the inside. Like I did, in my video, there's sort of like a template you can look at, that I take a picture of, and you can figure out how big you have to make it. But, it takes a little effort to do that. But to slap some weather stripping under there is not that hard. And certainly a frame rail blocker, like when I first started doing it, I was doing it through like, you take the fender liner out. You don't even need to do that. You just jam the thing up through under the hood, and you just tape it in place with a bunch of tape. And you should absolutely do both sides, by the way. And, re-drilling your holes for the cowl. I mean, you don't have to take anything apart for that. You just get some little rubber plugs. And in my videos, like I have links for where you can get these off Amazon or whatever, and some silicone, adhesive, and just plug the old hole and just relocate them in about, an inch and a half or so inboard. And that'll make a big difference. There's not many electrical things on the left side, like the water frame rail blocker on the left side is probably not quite as critical, but I have also documented it's the same thing. You still get a waterfall that goes all the way into the front fender on the left side. And, it takes you 5 minutes to put this up there. It's not hard. Literally anybody can do it. So, the low hanging fruit for the average person is probably, wrap the major connectors in the right front bumper, which there's just basically 2 big connectors there. Disconnect your washer reservoir sensor. That's, that is a guaranteed failure if you don't do that. And then, I don't know. It depends on how far you want to go, but like it's super easy to like drill new holes for your cowl.
Sure. That's very, very easy.
If you want to keep the car, like 50 or 70,000 miles, like it's probably a good idea to do this stuff. I just put out a video like 2 weeks ago. Actually, I think this is probably why you approached me, but I checked my connectors from when I originally wrapped them, which was like, 14 or 15 months prior. And I mean, they looked perfect. And I, if you look at that video, like the front of my bumper is like pretty clean too. Like I'm not in there with a brush cleaning this stuff before. Like, I mean, that's what it looks like if you get all the water out of there and all the road debris and stuff. And, I think eventually you're going to lose your VSP, or you're going to have some major CAN data issue from the connectors, or, something's not going to work. Like, it's just an Achilles heel. It's a bad design, but it's fairly easy and fairly cheap to fix it. Holding your breath until you have a problem and you're stranded, you have to flatbed your car, like they say in the military, hope is not a plan. So
no, I actually, just to clarify, I'm definitely not in that first category, and it always kind of makes me a little bit worried when I meet people who are in that first category. I'm kind of in between 2 and 3, so I've definitely done a lot of waterproofing on my car. Yeah. But you're reminding me of all the things that I still need to do. Like the VSP is one of those ones where I'm just like, I know I need to do it. I'm going to get to it. It's on my list.
On Discourse right now, there's another person like taking their, VSP out, and the new waterproof issue is the turn signals too. You're probably aware of that. I don't need to do anything, but like I've been wondering if I should snoop and see if there's like an Achilles. There's been several turn signal failures due to water intrusion. And I'm wondering if there's an easy way to prevent that, like seal them up with silicone and drill a little vent hole at the bottom or something. I have, this is sort of like when I have free time, I tinker on this, and I do have a job and a life, and my world doesn't revolve on waterproofing my vehicle. So.
It's funny.
So I have 2 questions as we wrap up here, and I'm going to forever address you as Dr. Waterproofing. One is, what's your video page? What's the name of it? How can people find it?
So the funny thing is my YouTube channel is not my name. It's ESrandl, as Randall. It's all undercase, ESrandl.
And so the final question is sort of like a 2-part. What has the FOA done to help your efforts, and what else could they do?
So, the FOA is an interesting organization. This is, again, this is actually my wife's car, but I'm having fun with this. I enjoy working with the FOA. And so the FOA has definitely empowered meet, engage with other people. I live out in the middle of nowhere, and but yet I can still kind of bounce ideas off of people and stuff like that. And um, Miles mentioned NGOs and USAID. I've personally worked out of USAID office, Miles. I don't want to go too far into like real tangential stuff, but I have in the past worked with USAID and NGOs. FOA is kind of similar to the NGOs that I've worked with in the past. I'm actually actively working with an NGO right now, and I won't talk at all about that, but I'm doing something on the side. It's medical, but it's an interesting group of people. It's people that tend to be a little more passionate about like problem solving, a little more community based, and I'm really quite impressed with FOA as a community. I'm super impressed with the leadership, but just in general, there's a lot of people like willing to step up and help other people, and stuff like this video interview. I mean, this is amazing what you guys are doing. Like, there's just layers and layers and layers of expertise and volunteerism, and I'm really impressed. And there's always going to be like the 2% that are sort of grumpy about hey, I didn't get this, and this, and you promised me this, and sometimes, I mean, you can't discount those things, but hopefully you guys have a thick skin and understand that things don't always go perfectly, and as long as you're kind of moving forward and staying center of mass, that's what most people want. So I think you guys are actually doing a really good job. So like, I sort of answered both questions at once, but I honestly, I don't know what, I mean, just don't overpromise. Like that probably is like the one thing that, like, be cautious about, like setting firm expectations about everybody can get internet, or, Ocean Pulse, or, something like that. And then I know you can't prevent, like, if there's a chip shortage, or, like, but just, the people that are unhappy, they're treating FOA like it's some business, and
Yeah.
they don't understand it's a community, and it's basically like an NGO, and like they just have this weird, like, they don't understand this is apples to oranges. Like, this is a community of volunteers, like you guys, like, you are not, nobody's getting paid for any of this. Like, I engage with people, whether it's on discourse or my stupid videos or whatever, because I enjoy doing it, like it's kind of fun, and, but at the same time, I can't be held to some standard, like, I have to go and fix everybody's car. Like, I don't know. That's kind of a weird analogy, but like, I think, people just need to be aware, and everybody's been, the leadership has been really good about this, like super level headed, and, without bashing people over the head, like articulating that, hey, this is a volunteer organization, we're trying to do the best we can. And I don't know that you can steer it any differently than that. I mean, I don't want to bash American Lease, but like, they are not going to come to our rescue if something happens like that. When I say I'm talking about like the average Fisker owner, and like, really the only hope for long-term, ownership of these vehicles is there has to be a business side of FOA, like where you sell some product and stuff like that, not necessarily as a profit, but the expectation has to be that the people that are, doing this stuff need to know that you guys are doing the best you can. I don't think you guys aren't articulating this either. Like, I really can't give you any real advice. I've been going on and on and on, and I'm just telling you guys, you're doing a good job.
You're reinforcing it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just say that with everything going on right now in the world, to be a part of a community that is this positive and supportive, even with that small percentage of people, like you said, who kind of complain about things, or the over promising gets to people and they get upset. The vast majority of messages that I see every single day are people helping each other out. Like, any question people post on Facebook or discourse, or even YouTube comments sometimes, there's always somebody jumping in and offering a solution, like yourself, Eric, with waterproofing advice, or even like technical information that they could use to try to figure out the root cause, or people offering to even look at like DTC reports, or even just giving like kind of each other like personal experiences and saying like, this is what worked for me. And I'm particularly grateful for people who roll up their sleeves and want to find the solutions to help others. And so, Eric, I think that was the number one reason for having you on this episode today, was to really actually thank you for like the work that you've done with waterproofing. Is one of the examples that we have of members who just dive in and go really deep into finding solutions, but then come back up to the surface and they're like, okay, this is what I found. This is what you can do. Try this, go A, B, C. These are the steps. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to record it and I'm going to put it up and you're going to be able to follow these instructions, and then you can do it yourself, which is, I think, the ideal model for this kind of community. Like if we can all do that for each other, then even if there are other forces at work here, like, you know, the cars will eventually encounter more and more problems as they age. But if we have people like yourself dedicating their time to figuring out the solutions, then we're all going to be in a good place. It's all going to work out.
Well,
so,
I appreciate your kind words. It is community sourced. I mean, many other people have done work on waterproofing, and you know, there's a huge discussion on the VCU like connector right now, which I don't chime into, but believe me, I'm following it. You know, like it's a neat community. So.
Yep. And we are going to call you Dr. Waterproofing from now on. That's just, I think that's been decided as far as the show. All right. Well, thank you for being a part of this episode. We really appreciate your time today, and for opening up on a personal level, and also your experience owning the car. It's been really great.
Well, thank you guys for doing this.
Thank you.